Hey guys, we've got to kick the proceedings off in
Yes, sir.
earnest here. We ready to rock and roll?
Yes, sir.
Jerry, we're coming at you right now, my friend. Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are so glad you are here with us, and just by showing up, you are already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, we feature two music industry pros who are well known, respected, and very vocal in their support of the music industry. Before we get started, let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Most of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I place music execs in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview. Also, please make sure your chat is set to address speakers and attendees. I want to thank our sponsors, for without their support, we could not keep this free. I want to thank First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker, Four Roses Bourbon, the Fairlane Hotel, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brew Works, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and Cushmaster's brand of CBD products. Let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome back my good friend Kevin Casini. Kevin is an attorney in New Haven, Connecticut, where he's been recognized by the New England Super Lawyers for his work in litigation, copyright, and trademarks. His consulting company, Echo Artist Services, maintains a talented client roster of artists, writers, producers, and DJs, and he teaches copyright, music law, and entertainment law at Quinnipiac University. Kevin's a member of the Recording Academy, Music Biz, the Copyright Alliance, the Americana Music Association, and serves on the nominating committee of the Boston Music Awards, and is on the board of CT Folk, a 30-year-old folk and roots music festival held each summer in New Haven. Welcome back, Kevin. Glad to have you, my friend.
Thank you, Tom.
And joining Kevin as today's featured guest is Bill Werde. Bill directs the top-ranked Bandier Music Business Program in the Newhouse School at Syracuse University. In addition to his responsibilities for recruiting, curriculum, and strategic direction and marketing for the program, he hosts a weekly guest lecture series with top industry professionals and teaches entrepreneurialism to graduating seniors. Before joining the Bandier program, Bill served as editorial director for Billboard, during which time he directed content strategy, planning, and execution across all Billboard properties, including Billboard Magazine, Billboard.com, helping transition the company from a print business to a business-to-business trade magazine to a rapidly growing digital consumer brand. He led the 2010 relaunch of Billboard.com, created a video department, and expanded across social platforms into branded content. The relaunch earned a 2010 Ellie Award for Digital Media from the American Society of Magazine Editors. Under his direction, Billboard also earned Eddie Awards for Best Media and Entertainment Publication from Folio magazine in 2006 and 7. His recent strategic consulting clients include Penn America, Oakview Group, PBS Landmarks Live Music Performance Series, and singer-songwriter Andy Grammer. He was previously an associate editor at Rolling Stone magazine, and his work has appeared in the New York Times, Wired, the Washington Post, among other publications. Please welcome these two amazing rock stars to the smartest people in the room. Take it away, Kevin.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Welcome, Bill. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. If I knew Tom was going to read that whole thing, I'd have made it way, way shorter.
You could have made it way longer.
It's all good. I'm happy to be here.
I like
these things.
In fact, sometimes when we get started on these, I try to lay foundation so people understand why you are the smartest person in the room. I usually say Tom provides the room, I provide the people, and the people provide the smarts. And that's definitely what we got going on today. I don't want to spend too much time on this is your life because we'll eat up too much of the hour.
Yeah.
But fill some folks in who may not know, maybe even students of yours who know professionally who you are, but personally, not how you got to where you're from. You and I are more or less from the same Delaware Valley area with parents that were teachers. So we've got some things in common. Paths diverge from there. What got you from Delaware to Syracuse?
Yeah, so it's a funny question, and I didn't realize, I don't think I knew you were from the Delaware area. I got so excited actually last night. I had a pre-call. We do a weekly lecture series with the Bandier program and for other students interested in the music business. And I'm just double checking that I can share this, but give me 1 second.
Don't break confidentiality.
No, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah. So Brittany Lewis from YouTube, who's just a superstar there, she's our speaker at this week's panel, and I had to call her to pre-prep, and so I sent her a note, and she called me back, and my phone rang, and it was a 302 area code. And anyone like that's like relevant to like absolutely no one on the call, but that's the Delaware area code, which I have to say, in 25 years of working in the business, you just never see. I wanted to be a high school English teacher because I really struggled to get out of high school, and had all sorts of problems with authority and all those sorts of things that teenagers have. And it was high school English teachers that kind of kept me focused and kept me going. And so when I got to the University of Delaware, I wanted to be, that's what I was studying, but I was also discovering music like everywhere. It was an amazing time. I started college in 91. So you had like the emergence of Lollapalooza, and you had like the earliest days of the rave scene, and you were still kind of early, like 5-6 years into hip hop. Everything, it was just an amazing time in music. And I was going out all the time. And unfortunately, I failed out of college. So I actually went, which is funny when you think about me sort of having some responsibility for a prestigious program, but I actually went back to the university after I took a year off. And I went back about the business of registering for my ed psych courses, and my advisor pulled me aside and was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, I'm going to be a teacher." And she said, "There's no way you can be a teacher. You need like a 3.5 to student teach in the state of Delaware, and that's mathematically not possible for you." Ooh. And so I wound up, I started doing some writing for the school paper, realized I loved it. And at the same time, I really caught the bug for the rave and club scenes. And that's what got me ultimately to like move to New York. A friend of mine was working at a little music magazine called CMJ. They needed a copy editor, but really what they needed was someone who could write in complete sentences about the rave scene, which was supposed to be like the next big thing in 98. If you remember, this is the time period when like Daft Punk and Moby and Prodigy and Chemical Brothers are releasing their first big albums. And that was going to be the next grunge. And so, yeah, magazines needed to put content out about that so that they could take ads against it. And that was my opportunity. So I came in, and by virtue of that, I was writing a lot about technology too, because that was so central to that scene. We would find out about raves through like listservs and telnet chats and things like that, these building blocks of the social web. So when Napster launched, my friends and I had already been trading MP3s for a year or so. I kind of understood it, started writing about it, and that let me skip a bunch of steps in my career.
Yeah, you kind of made yourself the only expert out there, not just through research, but tactile experience, because you were on the front lines of doing all of it.
It's funny. And loving it. Yeah, I wouldn't say I was the only expert. There are some great folks out there, some of whom are still around today, but I was definitely on the short list of folks that, like, it's interesting. Like, I started writing for the New York Times at a young age, and I think this speaks to opportunity for people, especially younger folks that are listening right now. The folks that wanted to write, like at the New York Times, the folks who wrote about music wanted to write about like Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen. And the folks that wanted to write about technology wanted to write about like Microsoft and Amazon, IBM. And no one really wanted to write about this like burgeoning intersection of super cool culture. And so, I found my lane, and that was a great opportunity.
Yeah. And I obviously grown with you, and you've grown with it since then. Tech exploded. Tech saved music many times over, or destroyed it many times over, depending on your perspective, I guess. But I wonder, you've written, as you said, for the New York Times, you've bylined in the Washington Post, you did your stint at Rolling Stone. Obviously, you were in charge of the ed desk at Billboard. So you've got some bona fides in journalism. So I kind of want to get your state of play right now on journalism in general, music journalism specifically,
Yeah.
listicles, journalists, what sometimes amounts to nothing but marketing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, listen, I mean, in my own way, I'm probably somewhat responsible for the current state of listicles. At Billboard, I still have some emails. So we relaunched Billboard in 2009, and we basically built the consumer play. Prior to that, when I first got to Billboard in 2005, 2006, the website was basically like we published some of the charts, but they were just ASCII text. You couldn't do anything with that information. You couldn't click through anything, no photos, nothing like that. And the news was kind of like whatever industry news we wanted to repurpose from like our magazine and publish later. And we started experimenting with like, well, what would it look like if we actually covered music from the fan perspective? We actually built a data department to start to understand the analytics of who was coming to our site. And this is interesting. What we found was like 80% of our traffic was coming from search. Like 80% of that traffic was landing on the front page of the Hot 100. And our bounce rate, meaning the number of people that came to the site and then immediately left, was something like 80%. So it told this really crystal clear story that people were searching for charts, finding our page at the top, because having a page that is just a list of all the biggest songs and artists in the world at any given moment, that was an SEO fantasy. But when they got there was nothing for them to do, so they split. And so we took that insight and we rebuilt the whole billboard.com, which is not very different from what you see there today. But there were a lot of folks, some folks from the industry and especially old school Billboard people, that at that time thought that I was the Antichrist, that I was, pissing on the grave of anyone who ever took Billboard seriously, that I was going to destroy our B2B brand. But here's the thing, and this might be another little lesson for folks kind of thinking about the industry, thinking about the business. There's no stasis anywhere in the modern media and entertainment climate. Every day, you're either taking steps forward or you're slipping behind. And Billboard was at a point at that moment in time where we were losing readers, losing revenue. This is the mid 2000s, right? Streaming hadn't started yet. Napster had let the genie out of the bag. And like every time Tower Records closed 1,000 stores or EMI laid off 1,000 people, that was directly off of our top and bottom lines in terms of subscriptions. The business model of Billboard was mostly charging people an exorbitant fee for a print magazine and charging people in the industry to reach out to each other through that magazine.
Right.
And that was just a dying model. So, from my perspective, it was like, what are the assets we have here at Billboard, and what's the biggest and best, most robust, powerful, important thing we can build with those assets? And to me, with that insight that I told you about, it was very much billboard.com. But change is hard. People, especially when they're brands that people are attached to, some of the folks that I speak to out there in the industry, sometimes like with consulting clients, the first thing they want to tell me is how there's no sacred cows. And then you do your research and you do your diligence and you say, hey, here's some initial thoughts for you and some things you might want to think about. And they're like, oh, no, we can't do that. like, well, okay. But anyway, yeah.
So you
asked me about the state of media. Sorry, let me give you a short answer to that, since I gave you a long answer to a question you didn't ask. My short answer is, in some ways, it's better than it's ever been. The rebirth. So let's look at two different buckets of music media. There's music media for fans. That's your RollingStone.com, your Billboard.com, your NMEs, like these kinds of brands that are out there. And I think in some ways, like obviously, a lot of that's been usurped. A lot of that's been taken over by user-generated content. I think whereas once upon a time, if you wanted to know like how to think about, the new Taylor Swift re-records, you had to read Rolling Stone or something to kind of get a sense of whether it was good, whether it was worth your money. And now you just go listen to it, right? You don't need publications to tell you that. And frankly, like, statistically and even just from my own personal experience, like I'd rather go on TikTok and see people bringing this music to life. It's a lot more fun. It's a lot more engaging. So I think the consumer side of the music media world is under a lot of stress right now. And you see it shrinking, right? Print magazines are all dying. The business of music fan websites is very, very challenged because the business of advertising by like thousands of people, right? CPM rates, advertising units against traffic on content. It's a race to the bottom. Those CPM units keep dropping, the CTM prices keep dropping. And you are seeing these, like, I think what is probably some of the last dying days of, well, if I can just get like a sexy enough photo gallery, like we'll get enough traffic that we can make like this much money. The flip side of that is the music industry coverage, which I think is in a lot of ways better than it's ever been. There's a caveat to that, which I'll get to in a second. But, you know, when I left Billboard was really kind of the only game in town in terms of credibly covering the music industry. And now today you have Music Business Worldwide. You have Music Redef, which is a daily must read for me. You have Variety has ramped up their music business coverage behind Shirley Halperin and Jem Aswad, who also went to Syracuse University. You know, you have, I'm forgetting a couple, like it's a robust and healthy space all of a sudden. Hits is in some ways better and more vital than it's ever been. I know some people will roll their eyes at that, but still. So you have all these different platforms that are doing, I think, important work covering the music industry. The caveat is consolidation is meaningful. So right now, almost all of those platforms I named, certainly Billboard, Rolling Stone, Variety, Music Business Worldwide, they all fall under the umbrella of Penske Media at this point, right? And so that kind of consolidation, you know, that can be a chilling effect for independent voices and criticism of the industry.
Speaking of Penske Media, you named a couple of things that I want to get back to, including Taylor and what my friend Danny Deal, another journalist, calls meme music, TikTok, Instagram, instant A&R. But speaking of Penske, a couple of weeks ago, hashtag started trending boycott Rolling Stone, and it kind of let up a little bit, but it's still out there. And it came out of people getting a better understanding of the political affiliations and funding that came into and out of Penske Media, the big umbrella corp that runs those outlets that you just named. And you and I had an interesting, albeit surface level, conversation about how people really, if they wanted to, could pull back the veneer and look at where the money is coming from. Not necessarily to where it's flowing from political campaigns, right? We all know corporations have their donations, and most will donate to both sides of the aisle to hedge their bets. But we started, and I put a pin in it so we didn't waste it all in the green room, so to speak, to talk about Rolling Stone, Penske, and international money that's coming in from foreign countries, from foreign leaders. And I wondered if you could take a couple minutes and unpack for some people that might have seen the hashtag but not fully dug into it. Unpack that boycott Rolling Stone hashtag for us from your perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, I think to take a step back, Mohammed bin Salman, who's the MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, in the context of Saudi Arabian politics, which is a very specific and terrifying context, but in the context of Saudi Arabian politics, he is seen as a progressive. His interest, largely financially motivated, is in westernizing to some extent that country. He is interested in getting, for example, Western pop stars to play Saudi Arabia. So like a little known reality, this is of course going back to pre-COVID, but it's going to pick right back up when we start international tours again. A little known reality of international touring is that promoters and agents would take an enormous check from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia would say, oh, you know, you can make $1 million playing Dubai. We're going to give you $5 million to play one of our new state-of-the-art venues, right? And then that money would essentially fund that artist playing other dates around the Middle East. You know, and it's been very hit or miss. Some artists have been called out on this, right? Like I think Nicki Minaj got called out on this and decided not to take the money. She recognized that she had a lot of LGBTQ fans in her fan base, and that her fans would literally be put to death in Saudi Arabia. and that maybe that wouldn't be a good place to go. The point here, to take it back to Rolling Stone, is that this money is quietly flowing into the industry. And I'm talking specifically about Saudi Arabia now, because there's a lot of international money that's flowing into the industry that is transformative in a phenomenally positive way,
Sure.
right? If we look at the deal that Hybe just did to buy Scooter Braun, like we could talk about that for 3 hours, because that is like really exciting to me. And there's a lot of implications there. But when we talk about media outlets, I think the problem is that we just don't know. Right? Like Jay Penske has not been incredibly public about exactly what this money is, where it went, how it's being used, what the influence may be. And I think that, everyone kind of has to decide how they feel about that, given that such an enormous percentage of the music industry coverage is generated out of Penske's ownership or under his auspices. And given that we know Saudi dollars are flowing into the music business now in different ways, shapes, and forms, I think it is an important question worth asking. I don't believe in canceling things, honestly. I really don't. Like, to me, canceling things is an excuse not to have difficult conversations.
Right.
And I think it's more important to have the difficult conversations so that you can win hearts and minds on important ideas. So for me, my 2 cents is I wish Penske, who I've dealt with, who I've had some business conversations with, and like I have a lot of respect for. My 2 cents would be like, get out in front of this. Like, if you don't have anything to hide, like have some public conversations about it. Have someone at Variety, Jem, write a great article about exactly what is and isn't happening, and put it to rest. But make no mistake, Saudi is a problematic regime, and if folks in the industry are doing business or profiting from Saudi, I think that's tough. I think that that's something that we should be careful of, because it is blood money, right? And I'm just going to say that, like, times are tough, and when times get tough, and someone comes along with a check for $100 million or whatever it may be, I think a lot of times that's when we find out who we really are and what we're made of.
I think you make a good point. There's a lot of foreign investment, let's call it global investment, that's doing a lot of good. That's either propping up portions of the industry like the Merck money, or that's making a couple people who are very innovative a lot of money. And we hope that inspires more innovation. But to follow the money sometimes is not in everybody's best interest. And so sometimes we don't. But you bring up something that you talk about quite a bit that I really enjoy hearing you and reading you say. And I know you did something similar at Bandier when right after the Morgan Wallen incident in Nashville, when he had his 2 nights in a row where he went out, he got caught on someone's camera in their, doorbell, dropping racial epithets when he was blackout drunk, I guess. And you quickly called together some people for one of your roundtables and said, let's have a conversation about this. We're not going to get into the cancellation of it, or the demonization of him for that matter, but we're going to talk about people about that current state of affairs. And so, that was all the talk for a lot of us for, 4 days. And then you saw his numbers on the charts spike and sales spike. And I think that was probably protest money. But pointed question for you, do you think the industry learned anything from that? And then a couple follow-ups after that. But that one first. Do you think that there was a lesson learned in there?
I think the only way that we can make it through the day in modern times, and keep our sanity, is to remain relatively optimistic. If you want to see a glass half empty, man, you're going to find glasses that are half empty everywhere you look. Personally, and this is, I want to acknowledge that this assessment is coming from the position of a privileged, white cis male. But personally, and having had a lot of conversations with folks that are close to that situation, close to having conversations with Black executives and leaders and thought leaders in Nashville and around the industry, personally, what I think happened is, I think Morgan Wallen was chastened. I think that his apology, which took too long to give, was ultimately what you want to see in an apology. And yes, can we question the motivations of that apology? I suppose we can. We can always say, well, he's just, he's just saying that because he wants to save his career. But let's look at the facts of this. There was no career to save. His sales had gone up. His streaming had gone up. There was very little indication that his career was in any way at risk. And when he finally took the time to make the apology, it felt to me like it was heartfelt. And the important thing that he said a couple of important things. Ibram Kendi, who can sometimes be controversial in his own, but is a leader in the school of anti-racism. Ibram Kendi talks about his frameworks for cancel culture. And two of the things he looks for is like, is this person likely to be a continued threat? Will people be harmed if we don't cancel them, right? And has this person apologized? Have they acknowledged that they did wrong? Have they committed to education, right? And he did all those things in that apology. And he also did something which I thought was really powerful, which is he addressed his fans directly. And he said, if you are defending me in this, I want you to stop. And that was like unequivocal to me. Like he kind of crossed a line into, yeah, this was wrong and you shouldn't be defending me for this. And I have work to do and I'm going to do that work. Do I think Nashville learned anything from it? I mean, I don't think we should hold Nashville to a higher standard than we hold America to. And I think, to think about Nashville is to think about the deep realities of race relations in America and the realities of what this country was built on in terms of slavery and the legacy of these things. And, I mean, listen, I don't want to turn this into an hour on politics, but if you're asking me, do I think Nashville learned some lessons? I think number one, they learned they can't behave this way with impunity. That if and when they do things that are egregious or they do things that that the world will stop and take notice, right? And so that might not be the most glass full observation, but from what I'm hearing, there is some continued work happening behind the scenes as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in Nashville. There is a long way to go in Nashville, just as there's still a long way to go in LA and New York, if we're really going to be honest about it.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about LA and New York in that specifically. I think on the heels of that, we had the delayed Grammys, and you had Mickey Guyton, African-American female from Nashville, nominated in the country category, performing, ultimately didn't win, but I hope brought that concept to more people. And this year's Grammys, somehow they managed to pull it off, I think, in an understated way. You heard Tom say I'm a member, and I'm an unequivocal supporter. I recognize that the Academy has work to do as well. But can we mark that as a touchstone, as a signpost, as a turning point? Or is that too fast to start celebrating things?
I think it's way too soon to celebrate anything. I think, listen, just like any journey we take, just like any goals we set, it's important to stop and appreciate good work along the way. It's important to stop and appreciate the little accomplishments that we're achieving as we go. So I'm not down on that. But in the big scheme of things, I think the Grammys, honestly, if I'm being, and this is going to sound like I'm being mean to the Grammys, and I'm not. I care a lot about the Grammys, which is why I have these conversations about the Grammys on Twitter, wherever I'm going. I feel an ownership. I feel like, as someone who has built my identity and my career in the music industry, I want the Grammys to be great.
Right.
Right. So this isn't me. I know there's a lot of haters out there who just want to slag off and no matter what the Grammys do, it'll never be enough for some people. That's not where I'm coming from on this. But if I'm being honest, I think what the Grammys did this year as it relates to some of the key issues that they're facing was really the minimum, right? Yeah. Because they dug themselves into a really substantial hole, both in terms of Academy membership and what that looks like in terms of diversity, and diversity all across the board. We're not just talking about race, we're talking about age, we're talking about identities of all forms, right? We're talking about geography. They they definitely dug themselves into a hole in terms of their membership, which I think then led them into a hole in terms of how their votes were going year after year, which turned into a hole in terms of public perception. Like when you have a reality where in the space of a few years, you have the CEO of the Recording Academy, justly or not, being perceived as alienating all women in and around the Academy by saying women should step up. And then at the same time, having a situation where during that same time period, you have, I think it's fair to say, some of the largest stars of the Black music community either writing the Grammys off or just passively deciding no longer to attend. You have a major, major issue. You have a big problem. So the Grammys relevance, I mean, I think you see this year, and it's not about this, right? Like all award shows are tanking. And they're tanking rapidly. Appointment viewership is tanking rapidly. Sports viewership is tanking rapidly. But the Grammys didn't have a great year last year in terms of viewership, and this year they fell another 50%. I see Nikki Jedell, who's a proud Bandier alum, just said, I don't think we can overlook the work. They've put a lot of equity into developing a hardy DEI sector to get out of that hole, and I just want to say amen. But I think, without being able to talk to Nikki right now, I think that like she and I would agree that, like, again, to me, that's like the minimum. That's the starting point. That's work they should have been doing for the last 20 years. It's work they're finally doing now. I applaud that work, and I hope it's not too late, right? I hope we don't lose another 50% of viewership next year. And that they, because I will say from a creative perspective, I thought this year's Grammys was phenomenal. I really did. I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought from the opening to the close, it was a better show than anyone I'd seen in a long time. They had fresh blood making the show. It felt fresh. It felt more spontaneous. It felt less like, hey, I'm going to tick every demographic box segment by segment by segment, right? Now we have the boomers, and now we have this, and now we have the country star. And it just felt like a cohesive, creative show, and that really celebrated music, and I loved it.
Right. I agree with you that I enjoyed it more than I have recently. I thought that it brought different people to it. At least different people mentioned it to me afterwards that I didn't expect to. But the numbers are the numbers. It's been halved, and if it continues to halve, then it goes nowhere. Appointment viewership is a buzz term that really encompasses that people want things mobile, on demand, in consumable bites without advertising. They're willing to pay. We know that already. And so I want to pivot a little bit and ask you about, like I said, what my friend Danny Deal calls meme music. Instagram, TikTok, this all started way back when I had a MySpace page, I guess. But what do you make of the fact that now even in Clubhouse, where we've all dabbled and I think dipped in and out quickly, what of that being the new proving ground for A&R, and good or bad? Is it producing good music, and is it good for the industry?
You're asking me specifically about Clubhouse, or you're asking me about social platforms in general?
Yeah, Clubhouse, TikTok, Instagram, the things that happen quickly and disappear on you.
Yeah, so I think that each of these platforms generally serves a very different kind of niche and a very different role for the industry. TikTok certainly has just been a phenomenal discovery platform for the industry. And, there's people who want to dismiss it the same way there's people who always want to dismiss like teen pop in general, right? Which it's always funny to me because, I mean, my God, like the industry would be 30% its size if we dismissed teen pop. Right? The industry has always had this love-hate relationship with itself over its own identity. And the idea that like mostly what we're doing is we're entertaining like tweens and teens. Like that's mostly what we're doing. And that's not to sell it short. I'll give you one quick example of this. When I was the CEO of this social justice agency called Fenton, which I spent a year and a half doing, I would go to meetings sometimes, and I would talk to people who are working in like social justice movements, or working to like educate people in impoverished areas, or working to create better realities against climate change, important work. And I'd bump into them and they wouldn't know me because it wasn't my world. And they would say, oh, what did you do before Fenton? And I'd say, well, I ran Billboard and I worked, in and around music, and they'd act like I just told them that like I had lost a limb or something. They were like, oh God, that must have been awful. It sounds so frivolous. It sounds so, and I would get kind of like a chip on my shoulder, because like I get that you're doing important work trying to like stop climate change, but like Justin Bieber has probably saved way more 12-year-olds, right? than like you have. So, and like that's real. My point here is like whoever feels that music, it's not for me to decide like, oh, that's not good music. If millions of people love a song and it becomes a soundtrack to this memory that they have, and when they're 50, they're going to look back on Lil Nas X or what's Charlie D'Amelio's sister's name? I'm blanking on it.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, come on. All right. Well, whatever the case is, like, if you're going to look back on that song and that's the song that was a meaningful soundtrack to you, then you felt that. So my short answer is, yeah, Dixie D'Amelio. Thank you, Sarah. My short answer is, I think TikTok's been phenomenal for music discovery, because I think that there are artists of every ilk and stripe finding ways to generate attention for themselves. And ultimately, and this is the really powerful thing for the music industry, build leverage, right? You sit down with a major label or any label and you don't have a following and you just have 9 brilliant songs, you're going to get this deal. You sit down with that same label and you have those same 9 brilliant songs, but you've got 200,000 followers on TikTok, and now this deal turns into this deal. Right. And that's incredibly important. I mean, throughout my whole career, I've always tried to use what is best for artists, right, and artist empowerment as a compass, whatever I've been doing. So, I mean, I'm super pro TikTok. Clubhouse is a whole different thing. I mean, if I had to put money down, I think that Spotify is going to wind up winning that space. But I think the idea of live social audio is probably here to stay. And I think the value of that is really a lot more around education and industry education.
Yeah.
The caveat being there's as much bad information as good information there. So you got to be careful of what you're listening to.
That's just the thing. I think that with $20 distribution, more or less a la carte marketing, anybody who really is a hobbyist can record something on a laptop if they get the right software and put it out there and have the chance that anybody else would have. Now, obviously, marketing and actual promo and P&R play a huge role in it, but having free access to these apps that have gigantic reach in and of their own is really the exposure that used to have to come by packing up your guitar and just kind of roaming around, busking, hitting the subway, playing as many cafes and bars as you could. You can certainly reach more people than that. But I'm curious if you have anything that you can say about the difference between somebody as a hobbyist staying there. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a lot of fun. And if you get nothing but enjoyment out of it, then you should stick with that. But a lot of people are trying to switch over to make it their pro, they're not their side hustle, but their only income. And I know you work in the space where you can help people, not only just performers, but execs too, grow their entire platform, their personal brand, and go from being a dabbler and a hobbyist into really occupying that space. Do you use social media in the same way for that? And how do you think people can best implement the tools that are available now to turn something from a part-time into a full-time?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think in fairness, it's not a question with one answer. What the proliferation of social media platforms has done is given us many, many, many different ways to think about audience aggravation and audience aggregation, not aggravation, although we could make a joke. Yeah, it's given us a lot of different ways to tell our stories. And so I think a lot of it, it's funny, I teach a capstone class for the Bandier program, and students come in and in the space of 3 months, we go from let's bang out a quick proposal and let's launch a business. Let's get something live and start doing things in the marketplace. And people are always like, how should I market? And they get hung up on like, what is my marketing plan? Capital M, capital P, how do I market my music? And really it's like, what these tools have done is let us get back to common sense. So like, what is it that you're putting out into the world? Who needs to know about what you're putting out into the world? Where are those people? And what is the most compelling message that you can put in front of them? And if you really start to just kind of think about it that way, in a very common sense sort of way, I think it demystifies a lot of this. It's an exciting opportunity. Where I think people go wrong is they go online and they Google, like, how should I market my music? And they find like a cookie cutter kind of plan. And like, you know, if you use a cookie cutter kind of plan, you're going to get cookie cutter results. If you do the thing that millions of other people are doing, you're not going to break through. So a lot of this begins and ends with, like, who are you as a company, as an artist, as an executive, as anyone with something to sell? Like, what is your identity, right? What is your unique value proposition? And, you know, let's identify that. And then we use that at the DNA level to determine everything else we do. If I think that, like, my identity is I'm innovative and exciting, like, those are the two words that I want my clients and customers and fans or whatever it is to feel anytime they come across my brand. I want them to feel innovation. I want them to feel excitement. But then you send out like a form email that's neither innovative nor exciting. You're like missing the potential of understanding your own brand. So you start with that in the center hub, and you just take that in all directions. Like, what is my customer acquisition look like? What does my social media look like? What does my press release or my press strategy look like? My comm strategy look like? What is my core product? If it's an album, like, okay, if my identity is exciting and innovative, like, what does it look like when I go to my Instagram account? Does it feel exciting? Does it feel innovative? Like, these are really fundamental ways of thinking about things, and most people just don't do it. They don't start with the strategy. They don't start with the identity. They start with, oh, I should run a paid media campaign, right? And it's like, no, honestly, like, save your money until you know who you are and you know, like, where the people you need to reach are, and then start to experiment with things. But man, when I tell people, like, take that personal identity, whether you're an artist, whether you're an executive, whether you're a company, and really, like, think of it as like a cutout shape in a piece of paper, right? And then hold every choice you're going to make up against that shape. Because if it doesn't fit exactly, chances are it goes into the bucket of things you shouldn't be doing, right? So use that as your standard. And then I think the marketing becomes a lot easier and a lot more fun. The other thing I come across, and this is a frequent conversation with artists when I work with artists, is I don't like to market. It feels insincere. Marketing is cheesy, right? And my answer to that always is, listen, insincere marketing is insincere. Cheesy marketing is cheesy. All I want you to do is think about, like, how would you communicate with the fans that you want to have? What does your authentic communication look like? And, like, let me worry about how to get that out there. But you be you. I'm just going to make you be you to, like, a 10th factor. It's not about being someone else. It's not about, like, walking around with your hand out. It's about believing that you're offering someone something with value. I believe in this music, and I believe you would love to hear it. I believe in my company, and I believe you would really benefit from engaging with it. So, like, good marketing starts with belief. It starts with authenticity. It starts with understanding who you are and what you're bringing.
Yeah, I think authenticity is the number one driver for me when I'm working with people who either love to be on social media, don't love to be on social media, love to diversify the way they interact with their fans, really just want to be very specific in the way they interact with their fans. All of that is fine, so long as it's natural, it's consistent, and it's authentic. If we come up with something that's a plan for a project, but it doesn't match the authenticity in the project, or you can't keep it up because it's not really you, then it falls apart really, really quickly.
Well, and I think all of these channels that you've noted correctly are proliferating. Like, I think marketing used to be a lot more cheesy and a lot harder to make authentic because there always had to be middlemen involved.
Right.
Right. And the number of channels that were out there were very small. You can take an ad on radio, you can take an ad on TV, you can buy an ad in a magazine. Those are your options. Right. And those three very tightly conscripted platforms, they have their own norms and their own sort of standards. And so, like, yeah, it's going to be kind of corny. But now, like, so much of authentic marketing is about content creation. It's about brand extension in the best possible way. And because there's all these different platforms, you can find the ones that make sense for you. I'm not on TikTok right now creating content, in no small part because I haven't figured out, like, what my voice is. I know I'm not going to hit the whoa. That's not my brand. That's not what's going to make sense for me, right? Like, even though I can hit a good whoa, don't get me wrong, but, like, that's not what I do, right? Like, right. So and I don't want to embarrass my students. Like that's their space by and large, but I've seen some other like more mature takes on it that seem kind of cool, and maybe one day I'll do it. But I'm all over Clubhouse because I love to talk about the music business with other people that love to talk about the music business.
And I think you've done a really good job curating your interaction on Twitter as well. I try to mimic your curation factors, if not your curation details, because you just say what you want to say. And if people are smart back, then you're happy to have those smart interactions back. And sometimes I'm those, and sometimes I read them instead. But I feel like it's, the micro blogging that we all kind of got into one degree or another lives there. And so some of the clients, some of the artists, some of the execs, that's natural for them. They have ideas, they have comments, they have opinions. Great. Others are just really creative and fun and have a lot of good energy. And so there are more visual places where you can go with that. And I'm trying to get people to try them all out. And I think it's great to meet all of your fans wherever they are, right? So don't tell them I'm only releasing on this, that, or the other thing if that's not going to work. But see which ones jibe with who you authentically are. You're more likely to do it. You're more likely to do it in an interesting way. And I think people are going to respond to your brand. You're really right. You've got to choose how everything relates to who you are and how you want to present that to people. With the caveat that when you're trying to get into different markets, you may have to tweak it a little bit, right? I've got some clients that play in Dublin, London, Australia, more or less consistent with, small cultural changes, but others that are big in Brazil. And so you've got to kind of be aware of that. So I want to talk to you. I know Brazil is a good emerging market, and I know you know quite a bit about emerging markets too, and how these tech companies can try to play into those markets and how those markets are trying to draw from these tech companies into new innovations. So where do you see this growing, not just vertically in the States, but overseas as well? Well, let's start with China.
Yeah, I mean, my God, I'm fascinated by China. And I think obviously the music industry broadly is fascinated by China. I mean, if you're asking me where I see it going, I mean, you can follow the trend line on the IFPI reports. China went through some pretty substantial copyright reform, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago. Prior to that copyright reform, they really weren't on the top 10, top 20 markets for the IFPI, which of course is the International Music Industry Trade Body. And really since that reform, I think they've jumped from like 17 to 14 to 11 to like now they're top 10. And we're still like, man, we are still at such a tiny tip of the iceberg of how big China is going to be as a piece of the international market for recorded music, because we're still at such a tiny penetration rate for China and such a tiny monetization rate for China. I took a dozen Bandier students to 4 cities in Asia right before the pandemic. And we spent some time in Beijing and Hong Kong for 2 of our destinations. It was a phenomenal trip. We got to meet with, ByteDance before a lot of people in America even knew what TikTok was. We met with a lot of the major publishers, a lot of the major streaming companies. The innovation that's happening there on those platforms is really, really exciting. There's a platform there. It's one of the top platforms in Thailand called Jukes, which is owned by Tencent.
Is that the Spotify meets karaoke platform?
It is. I tweeted about that not so long ago.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, man, like here's a thought for people, right? Like back when Spotify launched, a lot of folks were like, Spotify is going to kill the music business. No one's going to need a record label anymore. But the reality is the record label was able to have plenty of leverage over Spotify, create deals with Spotify for their catalog so that Spotify really can't put the record labels out of business, right? That's by and large true. What you're seeing though with TikTok is, I guess the way I think about it, right? TikTok has completely changed the leverage for artists.
Yeah.
TikTok, right? We've all seen these stories of, oh, I popped off on TikTok, then there was a bidding war, and I got to sign like an $11 million deal with a major label that lets me keep my master rights to the music, shit that would have been unheard of prior to TikTok, frankly. The way I tend to think about it is, Spotify is like the warehouse and TikTok is the storefront, right? And all of a sudden now that is a powerful, powerful thing. So you're seeing some like, there's going to be some careful negotiations between TikTok and the majors as we head into the future. But what's happening on a platform like Jukes is it already exists. In Thailand, you have the karaoke app in the same experience with the streaming music app. And they're already beginning to see like the migration of stars over to the streaming side. So you become a star on the karaoke app and suddenly you're streaming over here on the Spotify side of things. Now imagine if TikTok and Spotify was one company, right? Imagine if not only did you pop off on TikTok, but while that was happening, all those streams were concurrently happening right away, right? And you didn't need anyone else and you didn't need any other involvement. Like, could a major label still get involved and from a marketing perspective, turn you into a much bigger global phenomenon? Sure, but you may really think like long and hard about whether you really need that at that point.
Right.
And so, China is, I think when I talk to most Western folks who haven't spent a lot of time yet reading about China, and increasingly those are few and far between, right? Like if you're serious about the music business and you still haven't caught up, the name of the app, Brody, is Jukes, Joox. If you're serious about the music industry, you're serious about understanding where the music business is going to be 5 years from now, and you have not started doing your diligence on China, then I'm just here to tell you, you are not serious about the music business.
Right.
Period. But both in terms of innovation, right? Product and platform innovation, business model innovation, and in terms of scale, right? I mean, I forget the exact number. I want to say China has like 15 or 20 cities the size of New York City, right? Like scale for touring, scale for audience, scale for urban environments. It is just, it's like mind blowing. So, and again, we're just at the beginning of that. Right now, most of what happens in China is those markets tend to be dominated by local Chinese artists on local Chinese platforms. But it's slowly tipping in the other direction. The other thing I want to say about China and the East in general is like the power dynamics are changing. Like up until 3-4 years ago, it was very much like Universal Music Group controls the world and like they decide where to place the bets, right? Or Live Nation controls the world and they decide where to place the bets. And now like that's changing, right? Yeah. Look at what Tencent is buying, right? Look at what ByteDance owns. Look at what Hybe just bought in terms of like Scooter Braun's management company. Like the winds of trade, the direction of trade winds have completely changed and the power dynamic is changing. We were in a room with, I'm not going to name a name here, but we were in a room with one of the most powerful executives at the time at Tencent Music. And I asked him, we were having this big conversation with students in the room, and I asked this executive, are you worried at all what Lucian Grange, of course, the chairman and CEO of Universal Music Group, are you worried at all about what he's going to think about this deal? And he looked at me and with a slight wink in his eye and he said, who is Lucian Grange? And it was like, boom, right? Like, but it was a little tip to like, where is the power these days and where is it going to be? And I'm telling you, man, like, whether it's thinking about my program, whether it's advising businesses as I do sometimes on their content strategies or their strategies in general, I am so into what is happening in China, what is happening in Africa right now. I don't know if people caught like Universal Music Group licensed Boomplay, which is kind of the Spotify of Africa, into, I want to say like 26 additional markets, right? Like these things are moving quickly. Latin, South America, South and Central America became one of the fastest growing markets on this year's IFPI report. So like, you know, you just have to decide, like, do you want to build your business, whether you're an artist or a brand or a business, do you want to build your business around like what's happening right now? Or do you want to position yourself to succeed in a business that's changing rapidly and that you're going to be relevant 5 years from now or 3 years from now, or frankly, at the speed at which it's going, like 12 months from now?
I was thinking more like, 12 to 20 months. And that 12 to 20 months, the last 14 of it really has only been planning because we couldn't do anything else. I mean, I've got people that are out and will be this summer into fall and winter, but we had a year to try to look at things. And it wasn't as simple as just rolling everything over from one year to the next because things were happening so quickly. People rushed to tech so much more quickly than I think they would have if they weren't prevented from going out prevented from getting together with people, that there was a huge paradigm shift. You can see it coming. That's why I asked you when we started if you'd help us see around the curve, because we're trying to get ahead of it and just capture some of that. We don't want to be left behind. But somebody who's innovating, I know we've only got 5 or so minutes left, but I want to talk about somebody who's innovating by looking backwards. And that is our local favorite, Taylor Swift. As a Pennsylvanian, I will remind everybody that she is from Pennsylvania. She's not from Nashville. About a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, she was very vocal in that she didn't like the fact that Scooter was involved now and that her catalog, that her masters had been sold. She felt like he wasn't aligned with her from a personal perspective, and she was very vocal about that. And some people started floating the idea of re-recording. And people who know what record deals generally look like knew the clauses that were in there that would prevent that from happening. Well, here we are now, April of 21, and she's done it, right? Taylor's version of everything is out there.
She started, yeah.
And she's mobilized her army to do that. What's your take on Taylor having done that, not from a legal perspective necessarily, but from an industry perspective?
Well, I mean, I think it's great. I mean, I was one of the people, I actually wrote a column for Billboard where I was kind of skeptical about Taylor's re-record. Mostly I was just skeptical that she was going to follow through with it. I thought it was probably more of a leverage play at that time.
Same.
But, I mean, I saw some criticisms. I was reading something today that I found through Music Redef, which is, I mentioned earlier, a great daily newsletter if you don't subscribe to it. And it was making the point that like a lot of people are like, hey, Taylor, if you didn't like the contract, you shouldn't have signed it. But the inverse of that is also true, which is like, hey, Scott Borchetta, if you didn't like the contract, you shouldn't have signed it. Right. Taylor's not doing anything that she's not allowed to do. And she's not doing anything that other artists haven't done. And so I've kind of come around on that. Do I think it's going to make a big difference? That's a trickier question. I think Taylor's going to have a lot of say and a lot of clout when it comes to like any kind of brand deals and like which version of the song is getting used. And I think that's powerful and a big part of the revenue for, if you're holding that asset of Taylor's original songs, that's definitely a hit for you. But I still think a lot of those other songs, I think they're still going to get streamed. I mean, I think the typical person is not going onto their Spotify and like blocking the original versions of Taylor's songs and making sure they're only streaming the, like, I think that's a lot. I'm sure she has thousands, if not millions of super fans who are doing that. But when you look at the scale of her streams, I think, I don't know, we'll see. But listen, Taylor's doing what an artist should do. And she is seizing her power. She's using her leverage. And just the way that any label or any, music company would use their leverage, she's just playing that game. And frankly, it looks to me like over the last year, she's played it smarter than the people she's playing it against. I think the only time I occasionally bristle is when she makes it, like, I think she's really tried to position herself over the last couple of years as a feminist, as a champion of LGBT rights, as a lot of things that throughout her career she never was. And I do bristle a little bit about that. Like, if I'm being honest, just as like a fan, it doesn't feel authentic to me. If you want to be an ally, like that's great. But like you've seen where she's stepped in it in that regard, right? Like I forget the name of the video she created where like the LGBT, like a lot of people in the LGBTQ community, kind of took her to task for like using LGBTQ or using like gayness sort of as an aesthetic in one of her more high profile videos, which it's just skipping my attention right now. So like, I would have rather Taylor just came out and said like, I'm a boss, these are my rights, and I'm playing the same game you're playing. And like, I'm beating you at it. So this is business, this is not personal. But she kind of started, anyway, that's, I don't know.
You're talking about the one that she had 2 years ago, You Need to Calm Down, where she had.
Yeah, You Need to Calm Down, exactly.
Yeah. LGBTQ kind of pop culture influencers were in that video. I don't disagree with you. I'm not a huge, I can't say I'm a Swiftie, although I respect the game, certainly. But I'll remind everybody, she was kind of a kid when she got started. And people are allowed to grow. But yeah, she's playing the same game that many of them get to a point where they play. Everybody knows my favorite is Prince, and nobody took a harder and more out of left field stance than he did just by saying, fine, I'll just literally change my name at the height of it.
Yep.
So everybody figures out their own angle. There's probably
Well, let's just be clear though. Taylor's 31 years old now, which means like 2 years ago when she started to like do all of these sorts of things, she was 29 years old. So it's not like she was an 18-year-old like this whole time.
Sure, I get that, but I was a dope at 29. I'm sure somebody would tell you also. So I'm willing to give her a little bit of a pass for what happened when she was young. And I remember she famously never took political positions, which I know is probably tough to come out one way or another in country music because you're afraid or your handlers are afraid.
No one wants to be the next Dixie Chicks.
Right, exactly, right. I mean, they got slapped down fast, and not for their name.
That literally comes up. Like when I had one client who I cannot name, who was a big country star, and they wanted to do some work that was related to a progressive social issue, and started down that path. Like if deals were done, things were going to happen, and then word got out, and they pulled right out. Like
It was going to mess with the money
thing for a country star.
Yeah, if it's going to mess with the money, then it changes people. Yeah. And I guess I can understand that too, although I wish it didn't. Stephanie, yes, Taylor eventually came out and endorsed the blue ticket in Tennessee, in the state of Tennessee. Well, I mean, we're at 2 after time. I've got more if we've got more time, but I respect the time of everybody. So I'll see if there's more appetite.
I've got all day. Bill, I'm afraid, probably does not. Bill, how much more? I could pop some popcorn and watch another couple hours of this fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few more minutes. My next hard stop, I got a 3:30, and I'm enjoying the conversation. So, I mean, I don't want to overstay my welcome, but yeah, I'm happy to talk for a bit.
Please proceed.
All right. Well, then the next thing I want
I'd love to hear also is like if folks have any questions. I mean, I'm happy to answer anything about my past, about anything in pop music and technology from like pretty much 2000 on, ethical issues, moral issues. I don't know. Anyone wants to talk about anything. NFTs I see just popped up from Sarah. I definitely have a viewpoint on that.
I'd love to ask you about that because I still can't get my head around how it's not just an equity deal. And I had some questions about somebody online who seemed like they knew what they were talking about. But my questions didn't end up getting answered other than the smart contract will take care of it. And that wasn't good enough for me.
You're saying you're surprised it's not an equity deal in what context? Like, what do you mean by that?
Well, like when somebody was presenting to me, oh, have you considered doing this with your clients? It was, you can.
This meaning like doing an NFT drop.
Yeah. You can apportion off a part of the royalties to certain segments of your project, and you can get the money up front for them now. And I'm thinking, okay, but we could do that right now already, right? We kind of talked about that, but we decided not to do that. How is that any different? And the answer was, well, you don't have to trust somebody. It's automatic. And the contract that we put into place will keep track of everything. And so my question to them, and maybe you've got better answers than they did, was, do I have to get everybody who's got a writing credit on as part of it? Will it take care of registration or changing registrations if people should switch? Is there a chance for the person who buys the NFT or that downstream license, can they sub-license it or can they sell it on?
Yeah. So a lot of this can be delineated via the smart contract embedded in the NFT. And then on some level, when it comes to like distribution, for example, to co-writers, you could delineate that via the smart contract. Or you become the sort of, you become the record label, basically. You become the distributor of funds and take responsibility and ownership of that. I think that the NFT, so I'm seeing a few different questions pop into the chat about NFTs broadly. And like, this is my like 60 seconds on NFTs. Over the last 3 months, we've seen this like white hot hype cycle around the technology, and most of it has been fueled by a lack of understanding about what NFTs are and aren't. what has driven most of that hype cycle is we look online, we see these news headlines, and it says something like, oh, like the singer 2 Feet drops an NFT, makes $1 million, right? And that gets people really excited. And now lots of people who have music are at home and they're like, well, I would like $1 million. And so there's this kind of flood that we're already seeing die down dramatically. Right, dramatically. If you look behind, sort of like at the numbers, when I talk to managers of artists that are minting NFTs right now, the prices have dropped exponentially. And most importantly, because a lot of this is driven by speculators, right? Typical fans are not spending $1 million for an NFT. No typical fans are doing that. I'm sorry. I have seen no evidence that anyone is spending $1 million on an NFT other than speculators and investors, right? And the resale market for these things has dropped dramatically over the last like few weeks. So to me, I think we're done. Like, I think that the crazy, insane, like hype cycle part of this is now over or ending. And what happens now is like a lot of the wrong kind of attention goes away. And the people that are legitimately trying to figure out what do sustainable business models look like using the blockchain, what do sustainable business models look like, those people get to work. So I'm looking at companies like what Yellowheart is doing in the touring and ticketing space, right? I think that's really interesting. I'm looking at companies like Audius and what they're doing in the streaming music space around business models. And like, yes, NFTs will continue to be a future. If we think about an NFT simply as, you know, a piece of merch that is digital only, like that's the simplest way to think about it. We can create the scarcity. We can create the terms of that. So there's some interesting opportunities there. Like, what if we think about every concert ticket that gets sold for, let's keep going back to Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift's next tour, every single concert ticket has the option of being bought as an NFT. So, you know, you're going to have the ticket and like the normal functionality on your phone, but the people selling the tickets are going to have even more data and more useful information. And you as the fan are going to have this legitimately unique visual experience that does potentially, and in all likelihood, if it's Taylor Swift, have a resale model. And so like, these are interesting things to me. The idea like, the idea that the focus on all of this, and by the way, all of that tech that I just described, it's going to take 12 months, 36 months to really kind of hit some key points in terms of consumer adoption before any of that stuff really becomes real, right?
So you think the bubble that we had was really just smash and grab people playing it up, and
Yes,
that they'll be
100%.
on to the next thing.
It was
And
never
then
sustainable. It was always bullshit. There was never going to be like a day where like every artist can just put their music up as an NFT and make millions of dollars. Like, no, you know, like it has to work on scale. If tomorrow everyone who's putting their music up on Spotify, which is what, like 60,000 songs a day now?
Yeah.
If tomorrow we started getting 60,000 NFTs a day, you'd have the exact same problem of bottleneck. You'd have the exact same problem of artists like swimming in an ocean of content and not being able to pop out, right? And so that's all done now. That's my opinion. Like, you might still see, for the right artist and the right scarcity and the right amount of creativity, you'll still see some pop-offs in the NFT space. You'll still see some of these like, you know, holy shit, like, you know, whatever it is, Madonna drops her, you know, her exclusive this or that as an NFT and only one fan gets to have that experience. Like, it'll still get bid up. But for the typical musician, it's much more about, like, I saw Josephine in the chat was asking about like opinions on blockchain for rights and royalty tracking. That's what it's much more about. It's much more about having like fast access to the data you need for your fans, having fast access to get the money that's coming into you from your business partners, having fast access to all the data you need to track a publishing partner, to track a writer, like as a potential licensee, right? Like, there's some exciting futures there. There's some exciting futures around the data that all of this enables. But again, if I walk into a typical, not even like a grocery store, let's say I go into a live concert venue. If we all have good memories, we remember what those are. Let's say I walk into a concert venue with like 2,000 people in it tomorrow, and I ask all of them, hey, do you know how to buy an NFT? Here's a laptop, buy an NFT right now. Like, 3% of people would have any idea what to do. Do you know how to convert your dollars into Ethereum and convert your Ethereum into like a purchase? Do you have a wallet where you can safely, all this shit loses most people.
Right.
And until all of that becomes something that is pretty much quietly in the back end, This is never going to be a scale tech. So look out for those things in the coming months as indicators that we're getting closer, right?
Okay.
That we're getting to the mass.
The fewer barriers there are for people to have to learn or overcome this, the closer they are to the purchase point.
Yes, for sure, right? Like it's just like, Amazon works because it's frictionless technology. It's frictionless purchasing. We've heard a lot about like frictionless over the years on the web. Right now, blockchain and most blockchain enabled products are the exact opposite of frictionless,
Right.
right? Like you couldn't find a way to make more friction.
Right.
It's scary, it's confusing. Yeah.
There's another good question popped up unrelated to tech or NFTs. It was about something that launched last week called the Songwriters Pact.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I saw that.
What's your take on its I think we all know what it is, but it's songwriters who write for performing artists saying we're no longer going to give you a slice of our side of the copyrights in exchange for just you recording our songs.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on the viability of that taking hold and actually changing what really has been an industry standard for my entire lifetime, probably longer?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't be a bigger supporter of the pact unless I like tattooed it on my arm.
Are you the pact then? Maybe you're the one who put it together.
I can neither confirm nor deny. No, I'm not the pact. I'm close with some folks that are driving this, just to give my biases, but I'm close to those folks because I'm a big believer in songwriters. And I'm a big believer in songwriters, not only through the lens of like, go down the Hot 100 on the year-end chart and you tell me how many songs were written by the performer of that song. And I will show you a very short list of artists. Yep. So we know that these songwriters are driving what's most popular today. And yet they have one way and one way only to make money. Whereas the artist has many different ways to make money.
Yeah.
And the idea that an artist is then making a land grab. Listen, if you legitimately, some of this is open to interpretation. I saw one songwriter quoted an article who was like, well, if I sit down in a room with an artist and I'm taking their stories even, the artist says, well, I want to write a song because I'm feeling sad about the breakup of my relationship. Like, I feel like that artist deserves a little bit of credit.
I read that too, and I thought that was generous. And I wonder
if it's generous, but I can entertain that, and that's a songwriter's decision. But this idea that, hey, I'm Beyonce, and therefore I deserve 10% of your song if I perform it, because and I know that if I, by virtue of me performing it, you're going to make a lot of money, and I want some of that money. Is that legitimate leverage? Yes, it is. Is it ethical? I absolutely don't think it is. I think that artists who do this should be ashamed of themselves, like legitimately ashamed of themselves. You go use your leverage on the brands that that are doing deals with you. Use your leverage when you go do your label deal. Don't use your leverage to exploit songwriters who don't have other streams of income. That is despicable. And honestly, I think it's going to take some public shaming before this changes.
I love your unequivocal stance on it, and I plan to talk to you more about it offline. But the devil's advocate that bubbles up inside me says 90% of a global hit is a hell of a lot better than 100% of something that you play in your mom's basement. And you can't get away from the math of that. So that's why I know the choice is being made.
So Kevin, just because we're short on time, let me interrupt you and say this. You just made the exact same argument, the exact same argument that the mob makes when they come to your pizza place in Brooklyn and say, hey, it'd be a shame if something happened to your store.
Yes.
Right? Like 90% of your business right now is way better than something happening to your store. Like, that's bullshit, man. And it's not the ethically right thing to do.
I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of the mafia, but I can tell you, yes, you're absolutely right. It's a muscle play for sure.
And I just think there's listen, like I said about Taylor, make your muscle plays. You do that flex, but don't do it on songwriters.
Right.
I'm sorry. That's just the one place where I'm like, songwriters are screwed in so many ways today. They've got downward pressure on their rates from Spotify and Amazon. They're not all this growth in performance royalties. No, I'm sorry. Don't do it on songwriters.
I'm with you, because I think everybody knows it all starts and ends with a great song. Everybody is on this call right now in this industry, has joined many of Tom's meetups, Zooms, conference meetings because of songs and music. And it's all because of songwriting. So I'm with you from that standpoint. And I think that there's plenty of room for everybody to grow the pie so that everybody does better. But songwriters have traditionally just kind of been those people in the background that go crank them out and give them away and let other people take the credit. And I'm hoping that this is kind of the beginning of the end of that. So I'll follow up more with you there, because I know a bunch of people who are trying to pull in the same direction. We just got to make sure we all grab the same rope, and I think it's possible.
Yeah.
Did I hit my mark, Tom?
Crushed it. And just let me say on behalf of the audience that you guys have once again proven me right, that I can bring the two smartest guys in the room, and here you were today. So thank you. Bill, it's a pleasure to hear your thoughts on these myriad of topics. As I said a minute ago, I could sit here for a couple more hours, and frankly, you should charge money and/or college credit for some of your musings here today. This has been fabulous. Thank you.
No, listen, I just want to say I really appreciate the opportunity. I love to help folks in the music industry, and I love to talk about the music industry. So if folks want to track me down, like I really do respond to tweets, and that's my handle that I posted in chat on Twitter and on and also on Clubhouse and Instagram. So like I'm around. Would love to hear from folks and see if I can't be helpful in one way, shape, or form. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity. This is a really fun conversation.
I loved having you, man. Thank you for being so open and willing to give access to your history, your perspective, your thoughts. Yeah, I'm available on Twitter too. And if you follow us both, you can see all the stupid things I ask him and all the smart things he tells me back.
That's hardly true. I should have been the one asking you the questions, Kevin. Maybe next time.
No. I do this because I get to ask the questions. It's brilliant. It's a great setup Tom has for me.
Yeah, good stuff.
Thank you all.
Thank you much.
Thanks to everybody.
boss.
Final note here, as I always like to sign off, come back on Thursday at the same time. We're going to feature a couple of my heroes from the world of cannabis. Steve Bloom, the high priest of the cannabis industry, being interviewed by Fiona Bloom. No relation, but they do share a very interesting last name. And then lastly, to the audience, thank you for your time and your support. Be nice to each other and get a shot. Take care.
Bye, everybody.